Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back once again to another session of Chattin' on the Porch. My name is Brian Trippett, and I am your front porch conservative. This is that Thursday night live stream that is dedicated to you and giving you the opportunity to hear from some very interesting people from different walks of life, different perspectives, and definitely interesting all the way around. And tonight is going to be a really, really fun show because my guest and I are going to be digging into some topics that I've been wanting to talk to somebody about now for a while. And one of them has to do with one of my favorite subjects, which is the law. So if you're out there on Twitter, if you're out there on Rumble, if you're out there on YouTube, whatever social media platform you're out there on right now, please do the host a favor and spread the word to your friends. Tell them to come on in because this is going to be a really good time. Now, when it comes to individuals dealing with other individuals in life, particularly if one person doesn't like another, there is usually a progression of things that happen that wants for one person to have the desire to take down another. Usually it starts with jealousy or anger, and then it progresses to taking action, and then it escalates into something far, far worse. Well, in the case of former President Donald Trump, that is exactly what we are experiencing right now. But what's driving all this? Where did all this get started from? I mean, aside from the basic of human emotions. Enter my next guest. My next guest is a graduate of LSU School of Law. He's been practicing law in the state of Louisiana now in state and federal court for over 20 years. He's an avid outdoorsman, fisherman, and hunter. He's a lifelong member of the NRA, having served as chairman of the Friends of NRA committee in his area, which raises money for the NRA Foundation. He is the author of not one, not two, but three different books entitled Fake News About Donald Trump. His articles have appeared in the American Thinker, and he's appeared on various podcasts, including Coto's Business and Economic Report with Joseph Cotto, After Dark with Rob and Andrew, and Inside the Numbers with Rich Barris. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the inestimable Daniel R. Street. Daniel, welcome to my electronic front porch.
Thank you for having me on. I have to tell you, Brian, that's probably the kindest and most gracious intro that anyone's ever done for me. So thank you.
Well, as I tell guests of mine all the time, I mean, look, let's be honest. My channel is fairly small. I don't have a huge subscriber base. I'm operating with what I jokingly say is my tin can and string operation that is powered by cheap surplus Ukrainian equipment. But for all but for all of that that's wrong, there is one thing above all else I absolutely pride myself on, and that is a good introduction for my guests. So you come on my front porch, daggone it, we're going to give you a good intro, if nothing
Well,
else.
well, you're doing a good job of it. Although I will tell you, some of that surplus Ukrainian equipment's probably pretty pricey American equipment these days. So,
You know. Well, I got mine at a yard sale. Small little fellow with a beard, wore a lot of camo, spoke with a funny accent. I don't know. It might have been a little shady. But he gave me a good price. What was I going to do? So I don't know.
there's
I
going
don't
to be a
know.
lot of that going around for the next few years, probably.
Boy, ain't you telling the truth. Anyway, so welcome. I'm glad to have you here. For guests of mine who are here and they're meeting you for the first time, please tell us about yourself. Where did you grow
Sure.
up? Where'd you go to school? How did you become interested in the law? How did you become interested in American politics?
Okay, thank you. Um, I'm from Monroe, Louisiana. Born and raised here. The only time I didn't spend here as a child was when my dad was in the military, and he was stationed in Georgia at Fort Gordon, Georgia. So spent my life in North Louisiana in the Deep South. My entire family's from the South, and I became interested in politics as a small child. And what really drew me to politics was two things: President Ronald Reagan and the Iranian hostage crisis, if you remember that, in
I do.
1979 and 80.
Yeah.
And I got involved in it then, and have been interested in politics ever since, and have always followed it closely in world events and foreign policy and things like that. And I went to LSU undergrad and then LSU law. And then I came home and I've been practicing law here. Now it'll be 27 years in October.
Wow,
And I
congratulations.
represent mostly injured people. I do some other work, do some charitable work and some pro bono things. But the lion's share of what I do is represent injured people. So, and been doing it. Oh, but I wanted to be a lawyer. My dad's a lawyer. My dad and I practice together. He's still practicing. I'm 52. My dad is in his early 70s, and he started as an army lawyer in 1973.
Hmm.
So we've been working together a long time, and that's really what I always wanted to do. But I really didn't know any other any other way. So
Oh wow, that's great. So I understand you're an LSU fan. Am I
yes,
am I correct in that? Okay.
yes, you
Well,
are.
now I'm going to give you full disclosure right now. There's going to be a weekend this fall when we will be on opposite sides of each other because I am a Bama fan. Don't hold it against me. There's a particular reason why I'm a Bama fan, and it has to do with Nick Saban.
Okay,
Which I will. I mean, I'll partially. I mean, you told me where you're from. I'm from West Virginia, and you may or may not know Nick Saban is born and raised in the Mountain State. And the funny thing about it is, my state's produced some. You wouldn't think it, but West Virginia's produced like some very interesting coaches. You've got Saban, you've got Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M.
that's right.
Uh, the legendary Lou Holtz was born in West Virginia. So we for a small little state, we've produced quite a bit of good coaching. So come that week. No, wait a minute. Are we playing in Tuscaloosa this year? Are we playing at your place?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the schedule.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think we're at home this year, but I
Ooh,
might be wrong.
that's gonna be a good game. I
It's gonna
mean,
be it's gonna be a good game either way.
yeah, yeah,
Hopefully,
yeah.
hopefully.
Either place, it will be absolutely amazing. So we got a whole host of things to get into tonight, but one thing I want to start out with, and as an attorney, as you said backstage, you are always busy, so there's no doubt about that. But you have found the time to put together something that I think is very interesting uh, for everybody. So let me pull this up, and then I want to get into a discussion of this. You've written not one, not two, but three different books. Fake news exposed about Trump, and by my count, there's 58, about 73 different lies, misnomers, misinformation that are told about this man. Now, what what was the genesis that got you to want to write this? What made you say, you know what, this is hooey. I'm tired of this. I'm going to put some of this to bed. So, the floor is yours.
Great question. All right. Anyone that's conservative, anyone who believes in the gospel of Jesus, or who believes in the Second Amendment and small government, limited government, those things, knows that the media is unfair to conservatives and Republicans in particular.
Absolutely.
So I knew that. I mean, President Reagan used to make jokes about it, so I knew that as a child. But when President Trump, I have to tell you, when President Trump came down the escalator at Trump Tower, and I think it was August of 2015, I really
Mhm.
looked at it as kind of a novelty. I was interested, didn't really take it very seriously at the time. And so I come in, I have some resources that I check every single day of my life and, about news. And I started just kind of following President Trump, who at the time was just a candidate. And I realized within a short period of time, within a few months, that he was just being viciously attacked by everybody. And
Mhm.
and what really made it different, in my estimation, was he was being attacked by the Republican establishment. And that got my attention. And so I said, look, anytime somebody's catching this much flack, they're over the target, you know? And I just started keeping up with it. And I started keeping up with the misinformation and the propaganda and the lies and the distortions about literally every story that you can think of about Donald J. Trump, about his campaign, about his supporters, about his businesses. And I started cataloging it. And I eventually said, look, I'm going to make a book out of it. And I made one. And then, like, wow, I've got way too much material. And I made a second book and a third book. There's 83 chapters in the three books combined. And anytime someone purchases the book, one of the books, they get access through my website to a free chapter. So there's a total of 86 chapters
Okay.
just about misinformation about Donald Trump in the series. Yeah, and So I commented to you when we were backstage. I said when it comes to uh, media misinformation and media propaganda in the Trump era, there's a lot of low hanging fruit. There's a
Oh,
lot
and
to
that the
write
truth.
about.
That's the truth.
And when I tell you, um, I have I cataloged over 150 false stories about Trump or misleading bias stories. And that's not counting all the stories that the legacy media would not report, which is another form of fake news. But you can't write how do you write an article about that? Hey, they won't talk about this.
Yeah.
So, uh, but for one reason or another, some of half of those stories didn't make the cut and didn't make it into the books. But so that's really what happened. And I said somebody needs to document this. Now, obviously, to be total disclosure here, I'm hoping I can sell 3 or 4 million copies.
Here, here.
I don't know. That hasn't happened yet. I'll tell all your viewers hadn't happened yet. But the sales have been actually fairly brisk, and I've been politely or pleasantly surprised.
Well, all right. Well, let me ask you for people who are going to be watching this interview or are currently watching right now on YouTube, on Rumble, on Twitter. If a person wanted to get their hands on one of these books, what's the best and easiest place for them to find it?
I send everybody to my website, which is danielarstreet.com, and and there's links there. They're going to take you to Amazon. The books are available on Amazon, and so you could just go straight to Amazon and type in fake news, and you'll pull them up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's say that a person is at the bookstore or they're online, but let's just say the bookstore for the sake of argument. They come across this book and they're perusing it or they're thinking about purchasing it. What is the one thing that the reader is going to be surprised by the most when they start, looking through pages of this book or these books, I
Yeah,
should say?
that's another really good question. I can tell you what it is. Because I get it all the time from people who read the books. Is you will be amazed how many lies and stories that are pure misinformation and dishonest that you forgot about. Every time somebody reads one of the books, they tell me, Randy, I totally forgot about this, and this because it's just so much. You can't keep up with it all. So that's the number one thing I get is that people are just like, man, I completely forgot that the media did this and the media said that and the media said this. And particularly with so many of them, so many of the stories are demonstrably false, you know. So that's
Uh,
the number one
okay,
thing that people would be impressed by.
okay. I was going to ask you. Let me play the devil's advocate for a second, and not that I'm ever a want to defend the media in any way, shape, or form, but let's just, for the sake of hypotheticals, you say they're fake news. You call them lies.
Mhm.
Give me an example of a blatant lie, and how you can prove it's a lie.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay.
Um, Day one, when President Trump uh, was inaugurated and started moving his stuff into the White House, news media reported that he had ordered the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. that President Obama had put into the Oval Office, that Trump had ordered it moved. That was not
Oh,
true.
I think I do
That was
remember
total
this.
lie. Total lie. And it's all covered. I got a whole chapter about that lie. Now, that's a good illustration of something that to this day, and in fact, I even addressed this in the book. I said that to this day, there are people in this country who believe President Trump removed the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the Oval Office the day he walked in, and he did no such thing. So that's a
Wow.
good illustration of just a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. Let, all right. Let me ask you this: if you had, I mean, three different books covering a man's life over the course of now what 9, 10 years, who's been in public life for 30 or 40, but let's just take the period of time in which you've covered him in these books. If someone asked you what is the biggest lie that's told about Donald Trump, you would say what?
Yeah. The most egregious lie told about President Trump uh, was the Russia collusion lie. And that lie is not one lie, it's a series of hundreds of lies, really, dozens of lies thousands and thousands of hours, hundreds of thousands of print pages of misinformation from broadcasts and print media combined. But it boils down to the basic fundamental misrepresentation that Donald Trump and or people acting on his behalf had conspired with the Kremlin and Russians and Vladimir Putin to win the election in 2016. That is not true. None of it was true. And it was mostly the brainchild and the fabrication of Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee. So it's literally Democrat misinformation that the federal government, federal law enforcement agencies weaponized to try to hamstring President Trump's administration. And they did. So I would say, without a doubt, it's not even close. That's the worst. But it's not one small thing. It's an entire media onslaught of misinformation.
Absolutely. Well, let me flip that coin over a little bit. I mean, you followed Trump from the perspective of trying to straighten out a bunch of people in the media who've told lies about him. Let's step it back maybe a half a step. If someone had said, "What's the biggest unknown about Donald Trump that most people don't realize, but they've got some perception out there in their mind or in the world of him," what would you say to them? In other words, if someone said to you, "What don't I know about this man? Why should I give him a fair shake?" You would respond with what?
I would say that President Trump is an incredibly generous person, and he's also very he downplays it. He doesn't play it up. He doesn't do it for headlines. Uh, he has allowed people to use his airplanes, for instance, to carry people to all sorts of different type of cancer treatments and things like that. And he did it while he was president, including while he was president, and never even publicized it. Didn't ask for any publicity. I would think that's probably the thing that people aren't aware of. This single character attribute that people aren't familiar with because you tend, it's just human nature. You see someone's a billionaire and he's such a hard charging kind of business guy. You don't see the compassionate, generous side. And he doesn't advertise it either, you
No.
know. And I think part of the reason for that, he's actually been asked about this and said that, you know, that he's not doing it for publicity. And if he did, it would, I don't want to say stop what he was trying to do, but it would overshadow the help
Sure.
that was being given to people. So he just doesn't say anything about it.
Yeah, I've noticed that there are men of a certain generation, or maybe upbringings, maybe the better way to say it. That I mean, for example, Frank Sinatra. Many people will remember him for many different things, but if
Yeah.
you asked celebrities of that era, matter of fact, I remember watching just a snippet of a tribute dinner to Sinatra, and the great British actor Richard Burton got up and told a story about Frank Sinatra that he didn't say anything. He heard a friend of his was in trouble. He heard Burton was in trouble, if I remember correctly. And, you know, Frank didn't say anything.
Mm.
He just picked up the phone and said, "What do you need?" And it never asked for anything back, never asked for anything in return. But he had one condition: you couldn't tell anybody. You absolutely were not allowed to tell anyone about it. So, yeah, the idea that Trump does a lot of things that people don't know about, and I've known of other very famous individuals down through the years, if all the stories of their generosity were chronicled, I mean, it'd blow people's minds. And Trump is just that same way.
Yeah. And a good illustration of that, even though this guy, the person that President Trump was being compassionate towards another rich guy, but if you remember the owner of the New England Patriots, Bob Kraft, I
Bob
believe is his
Kraft,
name.
yeah. Hmm.
When his wife passed away, Kraft gave some interviews about this and said Donald Trump, was there for the funeral and all that, but he called Bob every day for I forget how long, like for
Hmm.
months, just to make sure he was doing okay, just make sure his mind was in a good place. And just I mean that's a simple thing, But I can tell you, if you decided you wanted to call somebody and you want to do it every day, I mean that's takes a lot of effort. The only person I talk to every day really is my wife. You
Hmm.
know, so I think that a lot of that gets lost, and part of it is that President Trump has such a New York City. If you know any people, if you have any friends from New York, he's got such a New York City. Um, Man, it's hard to describe. People from New York are they don't have a filter. They just they tell you what,
That's a
and
good way to
and
put it. Yeah.
and they attack. They're
Hmm.
reactionary. If you attack them, you get attacked back. I've got a good friend from New York City, and there's a couple of times where I heard him say things. I'm like, did you really just say that? And because it comes to mind, and that they talk, and you don't realize how kind and compassionate those people can be.
Oh, absolutely. Another good example, and we'll switch topics. Rush Limbaugh. I'll never. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
I've never totally heard the whole story, but Rush Limbaugh made the statement: if you out in my audience ever found out how it was that I wound up getting from Florida to Washington D.C. the night of the State of the Union and everything Donald Trump did behind the scenes to make that happen, he said, I cannot tell you the story now, and I don't know that we ever totally heard it while he was still alive. But
yeah.
I would love to ask his wife, Catherine, if you ever feel like telling the tale, would you let people know exactly what Trump did? Because this sounds just like a really good sit down and hear it story.
Yeah, and don't you miss Rush?
Oh,
Gosh,
every
I
day.
mean, what a loss. And I know we're going off topic here, but I was privileged that I came up listening to Rush, and I got to watch his TV show, if you remember
Yeah,
that.
I do.
And we used to watch it. I think it was Thursday nights, every Thursday.
Yep.
And I got to see him live at the National Rifle Association annual convention in Nashville, Tennessee in 1993.
Oh,
I went
wow.
specifically for that purpose. And he was, yeah, obviously he was an articulate, kind of bombastic guy
Sure.
on radio, but he talked. I would say his speech was probably 40 to 45 minutes, and he had that crowd, and there were thousands of people there. He had everybody riveted the whole time. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
he just had that kind of personality, and loved this country, and is what a tremendous loss for him. When he passed.
Well, we're going to get to a discussion of his successors, so to speak. But before we do, going back to the topic of your books, the fake news and the what I call the gatekeeper media. Let me ask you this: given where the current climate of the country is right now, and you've chronicled a lot of different things in your books, how much do you think that the mainstream media has contributed to the current climate that is America right now?
Overwhelmingly.
How so?
Yeah. Well, if you look at any number of the social ills that we're dealing with, any number of even just policy, government policy, foreign policy, economic policy, the legacy media facilitates almost all of it. And I say this all the time. You look at what's happening with President Trump, with the what I call the bogus indictments of President Trump.
Yeah.
You look at what's being done with other Republicans, that are in Georgia, the Georgia indictments, the indictments in Michigan. Those are all about dueling electors in Michigan. We can talk about that. But if we had a news media, and here I'm talking about the legacy media, okay?
Okay.
If the legacy media told the truth and just even handedly, just told it like it was, none of those things would be happening because the Democrats would be running for cover, and you could run that across the board. Whether you want to talk about this radical, the radical transgender agenda that's being pushed all over the country, and if the news media told the truth about it, if the news media told the truth about Missouri versus Biden, if the news media, the legacy media told the truth about the government suppressing and actively suppressing the speech of Americans, the government wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
All of it would end. It would end overnight.
Hmm.
And uh, but they have the media running cover for them. I tell people all the time, the purpose behind the First Amendment to the United States Constitution was to guarantee us a free press. And the reason we needed a free press was to keep government honest, to have people who are willing to speak, had the ability to speak and the ability to speak truth to power. All right. And what we have with the legacy media is media enabling government,
Yeah.
enabling government to take your rights, to suppress your rights, and literally to strip people of their rights. And with the media, the legacy media is cheerleaders. So the media, the legacy media is performing a role that the First Amendment, it might protect it. I'm not saying the First Amendment doesn't protect them, but it wasn't the purpose. It's not the reason the First Amendment was added to the Constitution.
Right. Well, with that in mind, I want to put something up here, and I think this is going to wind up being a remedy to the legacy media, mainstream media, gatekeeper media, by whatever term you want to call it. And this is from last night, and keep in mind this is still going. This is a 45-minute interview on Tucker Carlson's Twitter page between himself, Donald Trump, 242.8 million views.
Right.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. And we've got there's a long way to go in terms of, trying to cure the ills of journalism in America, which how do you even begin to do it? I don't know. I think one of the most basic things is how about we start either give both sides of the story or at least tell the truth.
Right.
So, you've got Tucker Carlson, you've got Benny Johnson, you've got Tim Pool, you've got Matt Taibbi, Mike Schellenberger, Crowder, if you want to put Steven Crowder into that mix. Then you got, lesser knowns, Rich Barris, Viva Fry, others. They're coming up. I call them the successors to Limbaugh. What Rush Limbaugh did for AM radio, these individuals
Right.
are doing for social media. How much do you think in the coming years that these individuals and others like them will be utilizing YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and other? How how corrective an effect will they have on journalism in America so that hopefully we're not going to have people? I mean, are people going to lie about people? Absolutely. Are they going to use the
Sure.
media to do it? Sure. But we're not going to see it to the pervasiveness that it is right now. How corrective a factor do you think the new media, if I may use that term, the new media is going to have going forward?
Two things about that. Number
Okay.
one, I'm a big believer in offering people hope. All right, in any topic we talk about. All right, the legacy news media does not have the grip that it once had on information, on the availability of information, the ability to disseminate information, or on public opinion. If it did, Donald Trump would have never won in 2016 because
Very true.
they were pulling out all the stops to beat him. Okay, so that's positive thing number one. They already have diminished influence. In the future, and a lot of this, a lot of your question, the answer to your question is going to turn on how successful challenges like Missouri versus Biden are. That's why the government came up with this whole scheme to ban people from social media, throttle social media, is because there's so much information flowing and the government can't control it. So if we are able to effectively limit the ability of government to influence social media and alternative media, uh, then we will see the influence of legacy media continue to wane at a much more accelerated rate. it's going to wane either way. And the reason for it is there's just too many sources for information.
Yeah.
But if the government can throttle it, it'll take longer. But ultimately, look, I'm 52 years old. When I'm 72, I don't think we're going to be talking about the Washington Post or the New York Times. I mean,
Agreed.
I just really don't. They're losing money, and they're losing too much money. And the reason they're losing money is people don't care what they say, and not enough people care, and people are getting information other ways. And I tell people anytime the topic comes up, I said, truth, justice, liberty, equity, decency, and the American way are all going to get a tremendous boost when the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and the LA Times all go belly up.
Yeah.
And look at the USA Today. USA Today used to be one of the most influential dailies in the country.
Yeah.
It's on its last leg.
Mm.
And the irony is, we're all going to be, when I say we, Americans, particularly people who are center right, are all going to be better off when it folds up finally and just shuts down.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
and so I think we're headed in the right direction. And now, to be purely selfish about it, I don't want legacy media to go away too soon because then I can't write about them anymore.
Well, speaking of that, before we switch topics, did you tell me that there's a new tome in the works? That there's a new. You want to talk
Yeah,
about it?
I did absolutely. I got a fourth book. I actually finished it, but the in fact, people can go to my website danielrstreet.com, and there's a link to the free book where it can be downloaded at BookFunnel. It's 25 chapters. It's not just about Trump. There's 2 or 3 chapters about Trump. I cover everything from immigration, some gun control issues, COVID. There's 10 or 12 chapters about COVID misinformation. There's a couple of chapters about Governor DeSantis and misinformation about Governor DeSantis. A little bit, kind of everything for everybody. And it's actually free. You can go to my website, it's free. Um, but it will be up on Amazon probably next week.
Okay.
So
Okay. All right. Very good.
thank you for that because I totally let it slip my mind earlier.
No, 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 no. Well, you tell me you got. If you tell me you have something that you want to plug, hey, I'm going to give you free reign to go with it, dude. I mean,
Thank you.
I am a free market capitalist right down to the bone. You want to sell millions of books. I want to get millions of subscribers, buddy. We've got the beginnings of a partnership here.
I appreciate it. Absolutely.
So before we shift gears, for those of you who are joining this live stream maybe a little bit late, my name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. My guest is Daniel R. Street, attorney and author. Now, one of the reasons I've got a lot of reasons to be excited for you to be on tonight, but one of them is, oh my gosh, I've got a lawyer that I can talk about one of the most exciting cases to make its way through the federal court system that maybe I've seen since the 1960s. Now, granted, I'm not that old, but I've read a lot of history books. And the 60s, as far as American jurisprudence, was probably one of the most volatile, controversial, and impactful decades in America's history. Now, I say this case is the biggest free speech case that's hit the courts since the 60s. Okay. And it is known as Missouri v. Biden. But before we get to that, it turns out your home state has a tie into this case. So before
Yes.
we get into a discussion of the case, would you like to tell our listeners how it is that the Bayou State is a part of Missouri v. Biden?
Sure. Louisiana's Attorney General, Jeff Landry, is one of the parties that brought the suit along with the Attorney General of Missouri and some other plaintiffs. And they actually filed the challenge in the Western District of Louisiana in the Monroe Division. So I live in Monroe, Louisiana, and I practice law in Monroe, Louisiana. And the federal judge that decided the Missouri is presiding over the Missouri versus Biden case and decided it is our local judge here. I practice law. He practiced at a firm in Rayville, Louisiana, which is a small town about 20 miles from Monroe, to 20 miles east of Monroe, Louisiana, and at a firm there. That's right, Judge Doty. And he did a lot of insurance defense in his private practice before being a judge, and we worked on the opposite side of some cases, and then he was elected to the district bench, and I tried some cases, including a jury trial in front of him, and then he ruled on this case. I can tell you, one of the concerns so many of us have today is like with the kind of people that we have that are judges, particularly federal judges. If you look at the D.C. district, and if you're like me and you're concerned about whether President Trump is going to be treated fairly, whether the January 6th defendants are treated fairly, and I think clearly they're not in the D.C. district. And so people are like, wow, I don't know what to think about federal judges. But there are a lot of good federal judges too. They're just people. Some of them are good,
Sure.
some of them aren't. Judge Doty, the presiding district court judge over the Missouri versus Biden case, is just a stand up guy. And now he's conservative and has a conservative judicial philosophy, but he's conservative even beyond the law. I mean, he's just a conservative guy. And but cares about people, cares about the truth, and all the concerns we have about federal judges when we go to federal court. Oh, they don't care what the substance of the case is about. Now you didn't do something on time, and they're going to drop a hammer on you and mistreat everybody. And he's the opposite. He's the most laid back. He is the kind of guy that the founding fathers of this country had in mind when they were thinking about appointment of federal judges. I assure you,
Oh,
that's the kind of
wow.
person he is. And so it doesn't mean, ultimately everybody that wants to win is going to win. That's not what I mean. But he's fantastic judge, just
Yeah.
period. And his magistrate judge is just just a stellar person. And I say that, look, I'm a personal injury lawyer. I represent injured people. So he's a guy who used to defend the claims that I bring. So he has a totally different approach on the cases, and most of the time you don't get this kind of these kind of representations about an insurance lawyer from a person that sues insurance companies. So that just tells you the force of the man's character. He's just a stand-up guy, and it takes a lot of courage today to call the government out on what they did. It'd be way easier for a judge to just, oh, that's not going anywhere. And so he's a man of conviction, and he cares about the law, and he cares about people. And so it's been a real privilege for me to be this close to that case, even though I'm not involved in it.
Hmm. Well, let me ask you a question. You say call the government out. For people who are not familiar with Missouri v. Biden, what is the genesis of this case? In other words, what were the circumstances that caused someone to say, you know what, I've had enough. I'm suing the Biden administration. Enough of this. I mean, your attorney general, who I also believe is going to be a candidate for governor, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, because don't get me wrong. I think there are a lot of good Southern governors, and I'm not just saying this because you're my guest. I'd love to see your AG become governor of the Bayou State. He'd be fantastic.
Yeah,
Absolutely fantastic.
it's his race to lose, I believe.
I
I
believe
think
you're
he's in
right.
good shape.
So what made and I believe it was Eric Schmidt, who's now in the U.S. Senate. He was Attorney General when this suit was brought, and your Attorney General there. What made them, or what caused that? What things were brought to their attention that made them say, "All right, enough of this. We're suing the Biden administration. We're suing the feds." Go.
Yeah, I I believe that it's a combination of things. Some of the plaintiffs in the case are related to COVID misinformation. There were people who were suppressed that were publishing COVID information, and then Jim Hoft, the Gateway Pundit
Hmm.
publisher, is in it, and these people developed the information and some of the data that indicated that the government was involved in a scheme with social media to suppress speech, and they took it. They were looking for somebody that would do something about it, and they landed in front of. I think they actually landed in front of the Attorney General in Missouri first. I might be
Okay.
wrong about the order of that, and they wind up the two attorneys general who were concerned about it got with the people, and they just started putting the information together, and then they started using their ability to gather information and investigate to get more data. And then what really pushed it along was the motions to dismiss were filed, and the district judge allowed discovery, which is a process in litigation, civil litigation in particular, where parties learn about one another's cases, and the plaintiffs were able to do some discovery, and they just, once that happened, the floodgates opened about all of the data that the government had been sitting on. And then Congress actually helped some too with some of their investigations into like then Twitter with the Twitter files. And so they just started getting more and more and more information. And it is literally, if you look at the exhibits, and I also have a Substack, and I've written about the Missouri versus Biden case on Substack. And I put a link in there where you can look at all the case files on what we call PACER, which is the electronic filing system in federal court. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of exhibits and terabytes of data backing up the plaintiff's claims. And so it's an incredible effort to hold government accountable for trying to suppress or for actually suppressing the free speech of Americans. And I think that all of us owe a tremendous debt to our Attorney General here in Louisiana, and to the Attorney General of Missouri, and to the plaintiffs in the cases, and to the court, because the district court granted the injunctive relief that the plaintiffs were asking for, at least part of it, and which now it's been appealed to the U.S. Fifth Circuit. So,
well, and it's not just an issue that they were like, suppressing. It's just out and out blatant. No, you're not. I mean, it's one thing to what's the term that the kids use these days? I mean, throttle someone on social media so their influence doesn't get out there quite as much. This is just out and out. The federal government is calling up or emailing Twitter or Facebook and saying, no, we want this tweet. We want this tweet suppressed. No, we want this person's page taken down. We don't want this information out there. And I've got a copy of Judge Doty's injunction here. And when I read this, I was just amazed,
yeah.
I mean, I'll see if I can make this a little bit larger, but the stuff that kind of got to me was he listed 8 different circumstances under which a person could contact, or the government could contact social media. And all of them, when you read through them, I mean, I'll just give you a couple of them. Informing social media companies of postings involving criminal activity, contacting social media companies on national defense or security, extortion, etc. Contacting social media companies about criminal efforts to suppress voting, provide illegal campaign contributions, cyber attacks. I mean, there's 8 of these, and each one of them, when you read them, I'm not a lawyer, but I read this, I'm like, okay, this is pretty commonsensical. There's nothing outrageous here. There's nothing over the top. There's nothing, it's not like this man's like, no, you cannot contact them except at 2:30 in the afternoon on the 7th Wednesday of the month, and only then can you do it if you're under weird circumstances. I mean, this is very easy to read, easy to understand, very commonsensical. And immediately, within, like, I'd say less than 5 days, the Biden administration had this appealed up to the full Fifth Circuit. And now I have heard that the case has been presented before the entirety, and I may be, if I'm saying this incorrectly, please straighten
En
me out.
banc.
En banc, yes. I have heard that it's been presented en banc to the entire Fifth Circuit, and there were various journalists who were there. I believe Matt Taibbi was there, among others. And according to Taibbi's reports, the Fifth Circuit judges took the government's lawyers out to the woodshed. Have you heard anything about that? Can you confirm what Taibbi was saying? What was the
Yeah.
give and take in the courtroom like that day? Because I've heard that the government didn't come out of this very well.
Yeah. Well, another thing to consider is that the Attorney General of Missouri and the Attorney General of Louisiana are pretty smart guys, because the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal is probably the most conservative federal court in the country. They're more conservative, in my opinion, than the Supreme Court, probably by a good bit.
What area of geography does the Fifth Circuit cover?
Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi.
Yep, that'll make it conservative, all right.
Yeah, so the case could have been brought in Missouri, been in front of a different court altogether, in different district court, different court of appeal. They brought the case where they would have the best chance, I think, on appeal. Yeah, the Fifth Circuit judges, or several of them, were not impressed with the government's case based on the questions they asked at the oral argument. Yeah,
Okay.
so that's true. Now, I do have to, give a little caveat here.
Okay.
You can't always tell what a judge is going to do based on what they ask,
That's true.
or even their demeanor. Now, I'll tell you, I've argued in a lot of courts. I've argued in U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal 3 times. I would say that 75% of the time they telegraph exactly what they're going to do. If the judge is if he's asking me tough questions, he's piercing to certain issues in my case, and I'm like, uh-oh, it's usually an indicator. But every once in a while, you'll have a judge that you think they're just dissecting your case and picking it apart, asking you tough questions, and they vote for you. And so you just never
Yeah.
really know till the votes come down.
Yep.
But I can tell you this. Anybody to the right of, I'm trying to think of a judge that everybody would know, a liberal judge everybody would know, because I've got some in mind that are kind of obscure. But all right, anybody more conservative than Justice Jackson on the Supreme Court is going to be appalled at what the government's conduct was exposed in Missouri versus Biden. And I can assure you that the judges at the Fifth Circuit do not like what the government has been doing. Now, whether they're going to agree that all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed in the lower court, is another matter. The order you were reading from, specifically for your viewers, Brian was reading from the part of the order when Judge Doty in the district court granted the injunction. He said the government can't do these things.
Right.
Brian was reading from the part of the order that the government can do, even under the injunction. He said, "Hey, you can communicate with social media about criminal activity and national security issues and all this, but you can't ban people because you don't like them.
Yeah.
You can't throttle them because you don't like their message. It's I think, and look, it goes right back to what we were talking about to start with about the legacy media. If you look at you were talking about what kind of influence the legacy media has on policy. This would end immediately. The government's efforts to suppress Americans' free speech by using social media as a proxy would end like that if the legacy media would tell the truth about it. They're not reporting on it. And when
No.
they do, the New York Times, the Washington Post both ran articles lambasting the district court in this case, as though he did something wrong, when they were literally running cover for the government suppressing the free speech of Americans. And let me put this in perspective for people, because a lot of people don't realize this. This was actually going on during President Trump's administration. And the FBI had FBI agents working to suppress President Trump's speech online and trying to get Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to ban him. Now, the plaintiffs in the case characterized it as election interference, and it was. Now, whenever this Chris Wray got asked about this, let's be honest here. The president of the United States is the chief executive. The people at the FBI answer to him. Now I know as a practical matter, the president's not calling up the FBI. Hey, you guys need to do X, Y, and Z. But they're in the executive, and he is the chief executive. So FBI's executive branch, he's the chief executive. These people are in the FBI field offices somewhere, actively undermining their boss.
Yeah.
And when this came out, what did the FBI do? Oh, they posted on social media that it was a conspiracy theory. You know, it just Chris Wray, if he had any integrity, any decency at all, if I was director of the FBI, I'm not expecting the director of the FBI to know every sorry no account thing that the FBI does. It's a big organization with thousands and thousands of people. But when it came to my attention, I would have told everybody we're going to get to the bottom of that, and some heads are going to roll, and they do just the opposite.
Oh, I know. A couple observations. Number one, talking about the size and the scope and the power of the FBI, to me, is all the more reason. I don't care if it's Trump. I don't care if it's a Democrat, but it's high time that the deep state, as it's commonly called these days, is be brought to rein in. When you've got populists among Democrats like Robert Kennedy Jr., and you've got populists like Donald Trump, um, Gosar of Arizona, I'm thinking Andy Biggs, Gates, and others who are saying, look, guys, it doesn't matter which political party you're a part of or even what ideology you follow. It has reached the point that the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Justice, they are out of control.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter. There are people on the left right now that are celebrating everything happening to former President Trump.
I know.
I go back to that great German minister, I believe is Mueller's. They came for the communist. I didn't say anything. I wasn't a communist. They came for the trade unionists. I didn't say anything. I wasn't a trade unionist. They came for everybody else. Then they came for me, and there's nobody left to say anything. Well, we're
Right.
getting to that point.
Yeah.
And it was test cases like, the ban of Alex Jones off of Twitter and YouTube. Nobody said anything. And then everybody realized, ooh, we can get away with it. So, and it just really, it makes me sad. It genuinely does. The other thing about when I think back, when you mentioned the Post, the Washington Post and the New York Times, when I think back to the days of the Pentagon Papers, and
Yeah.
you had Abe Rosenthal, who was the editor at the time for the New York Times, and the legendary Ben Bradley at the Washington Post. And Ben Bradley's like, no, we have these papers. We have the right to publish. We're going to put them out there and let the American people decide for themselves what is the truth and what isn't. It is not our obligation to censor it for anybody. And we're not going to let the government censor us. And now we've gone the complete 180
Completely.
where
Yeah.
where the media is desperately trying, depending on the subject, the media is desperately trying to censor. So to get back to Missouri v. Biden, has the Fifth Circuit decided the case yet, or is it still under advisement and pending decision?
Yeah. They unless they ruled on it today.
Okay.
I didn't check today.
Okay.
They
All right.
haven't ruled on it.
All right. The over under. How soon before this gets to the Supreme Court? Because either way, however they rule, this is going to get appealed up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, and if the injunction gets confirmed or affirmed in the actual language by the U.S. Fifth Circuit, the government will have an appeal of right. So the Supreme Court will have to hear it. Yeah, I would expect. It's hard to say about. You got to be careful about courts because they take a lot of vacations during the summer. Um, and you always got the summer recess they call it,
Sure.
and they come back and they're behind. I would expect something out of the Fifth Circuit probably September, October-ish,
Okay.
and then there will probably be applications for rehearing, and it'll be taken up to the Supreme Court after that.
Okay.
Early next year, the Supreme Court would get it, but then you know how the Supreme Court. Here's what's really important. The important part is what does the Fifth Circuit do with the injunction if they leave the injunction in place and say the government has to follow it, then we're good pending appeal. But if they suspend it pending the Supreme Court's review or denial of Supreme Court review, like like I said, I believe the government. I'd have to look it up to be 100%, but I
Sure.
believe the government it would have an absolute right to review by the Supreme Court on this.
Okay.
But um, so the Fifth Circuit could say we affirm the injunction; it's going to stay in place, and it just stays in place until a higher court says something else. Or they could say we affirm the injunction, but we're going to stay the injunction until the Supreme Court weighs in one way or another. So if that happens, we won't see any effect in all probability from even an affirmation of the injunction by, by the Fifth Circuit, because by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, you're probably looking at the way the Supreme Court terms run. You get to them in the spring. Usually their terms end in October. I mean, I don't even know if we get a decision next year. Probably, but the government would get to continue their shenanigans
Yeah.
through the 2024 election cycle,
Hmm.
which it would be unfortunate. So I hope to see the Fifth Circuit affirm it and leave it in place and say you can appeal and get some relief, and then it's in place unless the Supreme Court. Because the other thing the Supreme Court can do with an injunction, just like the Fifth Circuit did here, Fifth Circuit stayed the injunction pending the appeal, so the government can keep trying to ban people right now. And the Supreme Court could say that. The Fifth Circuit could say, hey, we affirm it. It's going to stay in place. Good luck. And the Supreme Court could say, if the government asks the Supreme Court to stay the injunction pending their review, the Supreme Court could do that if it chose to.
So it gets to the Supreme Court. I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting dynamic with the U.S. Supreme Court right now. And I've heard Robert Barnes talk about this on more than one occasion. In his estimation, and I can't necessarily disagree with him, you've got three dyed in the wool, almost libertarian style conservatives. You've got Gorsuch, Alito, Thomas.
Thomas. Yep.
You've got on the left, you have the three good fairies, as I've come to call them. You've got Sotomayor, Kagan, and
Kagan,
now
Jackson.
Jackson. And then the problem becomes the last three, which is what I call the mushy conservatives. You've
Mm-hmm.
got Barrett, who otherwise would be okay. It just depends on what issue you happen to catch her on when she starts getting wobbly at the knees. You got Kavanaugh, who is very much like his mentor, Anthony Kennedy. And then you've got a political chief justice. I'm sorry, he's political. There's no other way to say it. He's a political jurist in John Roberts. It's the last three. Everybody keeps saying, oh, there's a conservative majority on the court. It depends on what issue you're talking about. So if this gets up to the Supreme Court, do you think that any of the three good fairies could side with the conservatives on this and say, no, you guys overreached on this. You've been overreaching for years,
Yeah.
and it's got to stop.
Well, that's a guy. What I always tell my clients is that's a crystal ball question. and the crystal ball, I'll have my clients will say, "What do you think the judge is going to do?" Hold on a minute. And I'll say, "Let me look at my crystal ball." Crystal ball question: the Supreme Court will not approve of the government's conduct in this case. The real trick, and the only real hope, in my view, that the government has is, generally speaking, a court is not supposed to issue an injunction that tells somebody they have to do what the law is. In other words, you can't violate free speech rights. You know, and that's not what this injunction does. But that's actually the government's best shot. They say, hey, you're not supposed to issue an injunction that just tells us to do right, and that's how they're trying to characterize it in the Court of Appeal. And you got the potential to lose a judge or two on that, but I I gotta tell you, I really think we'd probably pick up. I wouldn't be surprised if Justice Kagan didn't disapproved of what the government's doing here. Yeah,
Oh
she's
my.
more of a kind of classically liberal person.
Yeah, I could.
Sotomayor is more ideological. Jackson's obviously dogmatic,
Oh
but
yeah.
Sotomayor is a little ideological, but Kagan tends to be more classically liberal. I don't think she would like what the government's doing here. So I could be wrong about that. Um, but I don't think that if once the matter gets before the Supreme Court, I anticipate a good result for the plaintiffs in Missouri versus Biden. But mark that down on your calendar, and we'll
On
come back
August
and
24th, Daniel said that, yeah, okay.
yeah, we'll come back and see if I'm right about that because that's I'd have to throw in $1 for you to get a cup of coffee with that prognostication.
No, you need 5. Remember, we've got inflation these days.
Right? Yeah, 250.
Exactly. So, no, from your lips to God's ear, may it be the case, because, I mean, there's a lot of problems in the United States right now, but we've got to be able to have honest conversations. My basic philosophy is, and I tell people this when they come on here, like the conversation we're having right now, I tell people, look, don't self censor. Don't worry about whether you're going to offend me. Speak your mind,
Yeah,
and that's the problem we've got right now. Everybody is too scared of offending everybody else, number one. And number two, you've got a government that believes that if the American people actually knew the truth, that they couldn't handle it. Well, that is true in one sense. You're probably right, we couldn't handle it. What they're not telling you is we couldn't handle it and we'd be PO'd at the government that's been suppressing the truth from us.
that's
So
right.
they've got good reason not to let us know the truth. But one last question on Missouri v. Biden. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion over the years now of like Section 230, the telecommunications law, how it needs to be desperately updated. But absent congressional action, the courts may be the best way for us to begin the process of bringing our jurisprudence into the 21st century with regard to the question of free speech and social media. Do you anticipate that Missouri v. Biden is going to be the last kind of case of its kind, or are we going to get other cases like this where the Supreme Court gets to, you know, flesh out the relationship between constitutional protections of free speech and social media and the government and how those three things are to interact with each other?
Yeah, number one, I would be in shock if this is the last in this line of case. Just like I would be in shock if no matter what happens with the result of this case, I would be in shock if the entrenched leftist forces in the federal bureaucracy just gave up that easily. They're just going to try to circumvent the court's
Yeah.
ruling. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and that's the way government functions, unfortunately. And I hate to say that, but it's true. Or in my view, it is. And if you don't mind, I would like to address. You mentioned Section 230
Go
of the
ahead.
Communication Decency Act.
Go right ahead.
I'd like to explain people because it gets bounced around a lot, and you'll hear if you study up on Missouri versus Biden. And just real quick, I have a Substack which is danielrstreet.substack.com, and you can go there, and I've published about Missouri versus Biden to kind of encapsulate what the case is about. There's a lot of what the government did to strong arm social media into suppressing people, banning people in some instances, and removing them from the platforms was to threaten the social media companies with amending or repealing or revising Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. So I always like to explain to people what that means. So what happened
Okay.
was I can go onto social media, I can go onto Twitter, and I can say things about people that might be defamatory. Now I'm going to tell you, I try not to do that. All right, I try not to do that.
Well, I'm sure your local bar association appreciates the fact that you're not doing that sort of thing.
Right. And, but so if I go and tell a lie about somebody, or just any user, you see, just get on any social media platform, people are lying about everything all the time. They lie about uh, public figures, they lie about other people on social media, they lie about things that happen. And even though a lot of that misinformation and a lot of those lies are defamatory, social media companies don't get sued for it, even though they're the ones that published it. They're the ones who sent it out into the marketplace of ideas to be spread around. So if I go onto my social media and I post that so and so's been arrested for molesting somebody or something, and it's not true. And all my I got 4,200, 4,100, 4,200 followers on Twitter. They all see it and they retweet it, and the next thing you know, somebody's been smeared. Twitter's not responsible for that. And the reason they're not responsible for that is because of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. The only way that they could otherwise not be responsible for it is the law that had developed over the years. And it really developed before the technological advancements that we're living with now. Was I could have, and it came up with cases like there'd be an apartment complex and they'd put up a bulletin board. And you could put whatever you want on the bulletin board. You post up, hey, I'm looking for a roommate. Hey, I got a dog for sale. And somebody post up, so and so is a bank robber. Mm-hmm. And somebody sued the apartment complex. Hey, they provided that bulletin board that allowed that person to spread that message. And the court said, look, that's like a public square. And as long as they're not controlling the content and they're not moderating it, they're not responsible for what people put up there. And that same rule was applied in the early days. You can go back and read the cases. They, what was that? That original, the Prodigy. Prodigy was one of the original electronic bulletin boards, and they got sued for that very reason. All of these social media companies are regulating content. They're using algorithms to show content, to suppress content, to put messages in front of you. They're telling you can't talk about this, 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 and this. You can read the terms that you agree to, terms of use and terms of service. Without the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, all of the social media companies would be publishers for purposes of defamation. So that's why they're so sensitive about Section 230, because otherwise, here's the irony. If Congress repealed Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, we would all get a First Amendment boost, because then all these social media companies would have to stop shadow banning. They'd have to stop throttling people. They'd have to stop banning people. They'd have to stop controlling content. Section 230 is what allows them to do that. So the social media companies are really worried about that. So when the federal government comes to you and says, we want you to ban this guy, and if you don't ban him, we're going to start looking at Section 230. The internet companies and the social media companies really listen to that. So
what do you think the odds are that somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years, Section 230 does get repealed by law and signed into by a president?
That it's very, very, very unlikely, in my opinion. You'd have to have enough Republicans in the United States Senate to beat a filibuster.
Okay.
And even if we had 60 Republicans, you're going to have 4 or 5 at least, maybe more, that are the Mitt Romney types.
Yeah.
So I just think it's not likely to happen.
So if we're going to straighten this issue out, it's probably going to be through the courts over a series of decisions over a series of years.
Yeah, or alternative media.
Yeah, true.
You look at Rumble. Rumble's really starting to cut into YouTube's business.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to take time. Look, I don't even have a YouTube page, because I know they would never allow the fake news exposed. And if you look, like when I run Facebook ads, I basically have to appeal to people that aren't in my demographic, because they want to prove the language that a conservative would be attracted to.
Yeah.
So as other as alternative platforms grow, we'll make some progress on that without changing the law.
Okay.
Hopefully, there you see, I had my finger crossed.
Your lips to God's ear. So, folks, if you're watching, my name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. This is Daniel R. Street, attorney and author from the great state of Louisiana. Let's shift gears into kind of the last thing to talk about tonight, which kind of builds on everything else: the indictments of former President Trump. As I said, I'm no lawyer, but I'm watching all this and I'm just shocked. I mean, it's like I said in my intro, anger and jealousy lead you to start doing certain things, and then you start escalating from there. And I think, short of, God forbid, physical harm to the man, we've reached the point it's escalated as far as it can get, absent the last thing I just mentioned. And a lot has been made of the three prosecutors in question, who I affectionately refer to as Alvin the Chipmunk from New York City, Jack Boot Smith from DC,
That's a
and
good one.
oh, you can use it. Just give me credit on it. That's all I ask.
Okay, I will.
Jack Boot Smith, and then you got Fanny Pack Willis down in Atlanta. Um, each one of them is, from my perspective, um, dumb, crazy, or both, all at the same time. All right, let's just start with the legal. In any of these cases, and for people who aren't familiar, the New York case involves the question of, did Donald Trump settle a private matter and thereby, skirt or break election law doing it? The Florida case deals with the question of Presidential Records Act. Jack Smith has now brought a separate action in D.C. with indictments saying that Trump contributed to January 6th. And now you got, Fanny Pack down in Atlanta who's saying, we've got RICO because it's a national conspiracy. All right, let's just get to the legal. Do any of these cases merit? Why should a judge either take them up or not look at them and go, "Are you people crazy? What are you doing bringing this in front of my court? Get this crap out of here." So, your opinion,
Yeah,
counselor?
yeah. I will say, um, in my view, that the indictments of President Trump, and in the case of the Georgia indictment, it's not just Trump; it's 18 other people and
Sure.
another dozen or so unindicted co-conspirators. They are. I've called them this. I've written about all of these on my Substack, except I haven't published the Georgia article yet. They are abominations. That's how I'd characterize them. I think that there's a process that you have to go through in federal courts, all about process. But yeah, I think look, just in my opinion, if these cases were in front of judges that were fair and impartial, that they won't last long. That's how I feel about it. Yeah. So the only um, the only judge I have a lot of confidence in right now, anyway, um, calling balls and strikes and calling it square, is Judge Cannon down in Florida. Um, she is not impressed with the government's conduct in the case, and she's made that very clear both whenever the the uh, the injunctive relief was sought last year and now. So, um, but let's be realistic. The D.C. district judge is she might be so biased that Trump's able to get her off the case. Um, she's made some public statements in court on the record that are just unfathomable to me for a person that would get to hear the president's case, the things she said about him. So I think we had a pretty good shot of getting rid of her. But that court, there's not a whole lot of friendly faces on that court in D.C. And then in New York, I'm not. I would love to say that all of these are going to be dismissed. I think they all should be. But we're at the stage. Let me clue everybody in on something, and I think there's a lot more people that know this now. But our federal law enforcement and in many respects, particularly in D.C., our federal courts are there, like particularly in D.C. district. I mean, it's just rampantly corrupt. And when I say
Yeah.
it's corrupt, I mean it's corrupt. The FBI is corrupt. We could talk for hours about that. You look at what's happened to the J6 defendants and how they're being treated
Yeah.
in this nation's capital. When the district judges came up with just concocted out of thin air a new standard for um, pretrial detention. So some of these people have been in jail for 2 years now without a trial. But President Trump's case is going to go to trial lickety split. That's what we're dealing with here. So, um, I don't know what the end result is. I know what the end result ought to be. I guess that's the way to put it.
Yeah, it just amazed me. I mean, I was watching I mean, everybody is known. I mean, let's just take the Georgia indictment, the most recent one. And right now, probably former President Trump has been brought into the courtroom, had his fingerprints done, had the mugshot done, has posted bail, and is probably on his way out, barring some change from the judge we don't know about. But I'm anticipating the man walks out of the courtroom having posted bail. What amazed me was, I mean, everybody knew the indictment was coming, but all of a sudden on a Monday, Fannie Willis is just flying through these witnesses before the grand jury, flying through everything. All of a sudden, 40 something charges get posted on the Fulton County website telling you what the man's going to be charged with. And we meant to hit save on the computer as opposed to send. And I'm sitting here going,
Yeah, yeah.
save
You buy
what?
that?
You had a judge assigned to this, a case number assigned to this, specific charges assigned. You're trying to tell before a vote of the grand jury supposedly is even taken. Now, the old saying goes, you can get a grand jury to vote for a ham sandwich, but even by that standard, this is ridiculous. And believe it. I mean, take it for what it's worth. I mean, former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich is giving an interview to Charlie Kirk, and he was being told by someone he considers to be very credible that Fannie Willis was basically contacted out of D.C. and said, "You will indict him on Monday night." She's like, "I can't. No. You bring your grand jurors in. You hold them in court however long you have to, but you're going to do this on Monday night." It is astounding to me, and the level. I mean, talk about D.C. I can make a good argument that the level of corruption out of Atlanta is
Oh,
rivals DC. I mean,
yeah.
everybody's
No, it's
getting
worse.
well, everybody's getting mad at Fannie Willis and the Democrats in Atlanta. With all due respect, may I point out, you got a Republican governor in Georgia, you got a Republican attorney general, you got a Republican secretary of state, and you have a Republican legislature. And what are they doing? Nothing.
Yeah, because they want to
And
get rid of Trump. Most of them, not the legislature, but the governor and the secretary, certainly the secretary of state.
oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But there is one saving grace, and I do want your opinion on this. Most of these charges, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, revolve around the idea that Donald Trump knew that his claims about election fraud were a lie.
Hmm.
Let me ask you this. Have these people opened themselves up during discovery, assuming a judge lets it get that far, or the type of discovery his lawyers want? Have these people opened themselves up to re-litigate the entire election 2020?
Yeah. I would I would characterize it this way. I wouldn't say relitigate because these questions haven't been litigated. You
Good
know,
point. Real
um,
good point.
and I've been telling people this about Georgia in particular, and if you read that indictment, and this look, there's so many things about this. We could talk for 5 hours
Oh, I
about
know.
all of this. It's just terrible. But these are grotesquely politicized indictments. They're called speaking indictments. They're unethical, in my opinion. And but I don't think that Georgia, in the Georgia case in particular, that they actually want a trial. I don't think this is about a trial. And the reason I say that is because they know. I always remember this. Remember, anytime you're talking about any kind of political issue, I don't care if an argument, a claim, a policy position, whatever it is. If the Democrats are accusing someone of something, they're actually guilty of it. And
Oh
always
yeah.
remember that. All right. They know, in Georgia in particular, and if you follow Robert Barnes, Robert was for a brief time on Trump's legal team in Georgia.
Hmm.
And Robert said this is one of the best election challenges he'd ever seen. You know, and in Georgia, they didn't even appoint a judge to hear it. And they were supposed to do that in days, and they never appointed, just run the clock out so there couldn't be a hearing. We know there were so many, there's so many provable errors in Georgia. And they don't have to be, they're real careful when they're talking about fraud. All you have to do in Georgia, under Georgia law, is prove there's illegal votes, and it implicates the margin. So we know there's 35,000. It's a little bit over 35,000 people that moved within 30 days before the election, didn't change their voter registration and cast a ballot in Georgia. Those are 35,000 illegal votes. We know there's 1,401 people that cast ballots that their address when they gave the registrar was a PO box. Those are all illegal votes. So when you start adding up, we got over 300,000 without a chain of custody. We've got all the ballot harvesting issues. We've got the limiting audit that was done in Fulton County had a 60% error rate. You put all of that stuff together, they don't want a trial. That's
Because
not what this is about.
it all comes out.
That's not what this is about. I can assure you. And so, I think that I have a personal opinion. It is just a personal opinion.
Go ahead.
But I think that what's going on, and look, if you go back and study January 6th, all right, and at the time, I had friends, people I knew that are say, "Hey, man, are you going to Washington?" I said, "Don't go anywhere near Washington. It's going to be riddled with confidential informants, federal agents undercover, Antifa people, and agent provocateurs, and they're going to start a riot and arrest as many people as they could." And I got to tell you, they wouldn't even they did worse than I thought. I didn't think they were going to let people in the White in the Capitol, but they did. And but look, if you've ever dealt with the federal government, what was going to happen up there was blatantly obvious,
Yeah.
and it's exactly what happened. But it wasn't as bad as the Democrats wanted it to be. Okay, and that's why they have to. That's why I've got a couple of chapters in volume one of my book that deals with how they embellished about January 6th. It wasn't an armed insurrection. There wasn't $30 million worth of damage done. There are all these different things that they just lied about. There wasn't 10 people killed. You know, why would they do all that? Because they want to make it worse than it actually was. Why they didn't make it worse than it actually was? Because they didn't. It wasn't mission accomplished, right? Now the
Yeah.
reason they did all that, in my opinion, if you take the January 6th Capitol breach out of the equation, all right, and we know that the people in many cases were just let in. Doors that locked
Yeah.
and unlocked from the inside were open. Hey, y'all come on in here, and people start wandering around because in the absence of that, no matter what Mike Pence did or didn't do, there was going to be a historic objection. It was going to be the greatest number of votes in favor of not certifying an election in history.
Hmm.
It's already, I think it already is anyway, but I might be wrong about that. But it would have been for sure because look how many people changed their mind about voting against certification. You had Perdue from Georgia, Loeffler from Georgia, Marshall
Blackburn, Tennessee.
Blackburn from Tennessee. I mean, they had half their votes in the Senate evaporate and more than half probably in the House because they all had to be evacuated. And that was all a bunch of BS. And so that's the end game. What the Democrats really wanted was real violence and a real riot. And I think, and like I said, this is just my opinion. I don't have any insight. I'm not telling you that I'm getting little whispers from somebody in Washington. But I think that's what they're after, particularly in Georgia, because it's so outrageous.
Yeah.
Georgia's those charges are just outrageous. Look, they put in their indictment that Trump lied about the State Farm Center being evacuated or shut down or whatever because of the broke water main. That's what there's dozens of witnesses that testified to that, and several national media outlets broadcast it because that's what they were told by the election workers at the State Farm Center.
Hmm.
So look, I'm telling you, and listen, people forget there were hearings in front of the Georgia legislature, and the Georgia Senate's report recommended that their results not be certified.
Yeah,
Now,
and people forget that.
you're going to go to court over all that? I mean, good luck, And so that's not what it's about. It's about something else. And I think what they want to do is spur, foment, promote, cause, whatever, the riot, the people with guns who are pissed off
Hmm.
showing up and doing what didn't happen on January 6th. That's my opinion. Let's see.
Ooh.
We can mark that down and see if I'm right about that one.
Okay. Well, this is one of those moments from your lips, not to God's ear.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah.
but I
And I
mean,
hope I'm
yeah,
wrong. I
yeah.
do.
I mean, I do too, because I mean, I have friends of mine, from various circles, and we're talking about all the time. You know, I mean, I used to think that Tim Pool was just a conspiracy theorist with the words Civil War, Civil War, Civil War.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here going, we're getting dangerously close. And using lawfare like is being
Mm-hmm.
done against the former president, you can't have 75 million people watch what's happening to this man and not have a powder keg with a long fuse, and the
Yeah.
fuse is getting shorter and shorter,
I mean,
you
how many
know?
people do you know if you think about it? I've I can I've got quite a few friends who said, I'm not letting that man go to jail. You know? I mean,
Ooh.
so if it gets to that, there's probably millions of people who are not going to allow that to happen. And
Yeah.
and and I think that's what they're really after. They're after something like that so they can get the crackdown that they really want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it amazes me that she's trying to charge him with RICO, and I'm sitting here going, yeah, the definition of RICO and racketeering, yeah,
Hmm.
okay, racketeering, trying to create a problem and then come in and solve it. And I'm thinking, what problem is being solved here? It's still unsolved. You
Well,
never
and
you
and
ne- you never litigated this case the way it should have been litigated. You had the Secretary of State telling the Trump administration, no, we have found no problems. It's a clean election. It's good."
uh,
You know.
there's 20,000 affidavits that Voter Georgia and others have taken in Gwinnett County alone.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, of people about people showing up to vote and saying their vote already been cast. People who didn't vote, who there's a vote cast for them. All kinds of different election irregularities that are way beyond the margin of victory in Georgia. And I just, and there's not even there's no racket and there's
Yeah.
no enterprise. There has to
Yeah.
be an enterprise, and for the Georgia RICO
Well,
statute.
and the other thing is like, okay, let's assume there is a conspiracy. Don't you have to sort of confine that under Georgia law to be happening inside Georgia in order to make that stick? I mean, she's throwing in indictments. Okay, this person in Pennsylvania said this. This person in Wisconsin said this. Donald Trump's tweeting from the White House, "Hey, you ought to watch OAN because they got a special about election fraud." And everybody's no. What does this have to do with Georgia?
Yeah.
Fanny, what does this have to do with Georgia? There's
And
nothing in this that has to do with Georgia. Little to nothing has to do with Georgia.
that you hit on something here that's really what this boils down to. This is a county prosecutor. Okay. Now, we have a prosecutor in the parish. We have parishes in Louisiana, not
Yep.
counties. We have a prosecutor here. Do we call him a DA? District attorney. Great guy, does a good job. But he wouldn't dream of charging Joe Biden over election charges, election challenges, because that's above his pay grade. Okay, this Fannie Willis is way above her pay grade. Now, here's another prediction I'm going to make for you. And we'll mark this one down. We'll come back and see if I was right.
Okay.
Mark Meadows and Jeff Clark have already moved under 28 USC 1442 to remove the case to federal court. One thing people don't realize about removing to federal court under that provision, if one person charged with that indictment is successful at getting the case removed to federal court, the whole case goes. Okay, people don't realize that. The whole case. This whole case is going to be in federal court, and about half the people in it have will be entitled to qualified immunity, and they'll get dismissed. So this case is all that's going to have to be ruled on. That's going to happen in federal court. This nonsense about Fannie Willis. So this case needs to be tried on October 23rd. I mean, that's just retarded.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
just silliness.
Well,
And
it goes. And each one of these. Alvin Bragg wants to start his case. I think it's in March of next year. You got Jack Boot wants to start his case in January of next year, like a week
December.
before December, and have
Yeah.
a ruling done by 2 weeks before the Iowa caucus. And nobody thinks that oh no, there's nothing political in these
It's nothing
indictments. Not at
political
all.
about this.
No,
And then
no.
yeah, and then on top of that, you've got that Jack Smith goes down to argue, in Florida, and at the time he's still using the D.C. grand jury,
Yeah,
which they can't use the grand jury. And then after the indictment, he's using the grand juries. People don't realize this. There's federal case law on it. You're not the government once they charge you. They're not supposed to use the grand jury to do discovery on you. You know,
exactly,
and
exactly.
he goes and tells the court, "Oh, we could try this case in December," when he had to know that he
Yep.
was going to add a defendant in a superseding indictment. And let me clue everybody in on that too. This is another thing. It's very important observation to make about the Florida indictment. That's the indictment of President Trump that has to do with the records from his presidency. All right.
Yep.
That speaking indictment is littered with references to classified, classified this and classified that and classified this, and all their public statements about it, classified this and classified that. President Trump is not charged in any indictment, but he's not charged in the Florida indictment, which is the only one that's really dealing with documents, with any violation of federal classified information or classified document statutes. That's a very important thing that people don't realize. He is not. We've got a whole laundry list of these statutes about handling classified information, sharing classified information, keeping it, losing it, everything you can think of. He is not charged with any of that. He's charged under the Espionage Act with national defense information, which does not have to be classified. Okay, so when they issued that, they include in the indictment initially. This is the Florida indictment about the interview that President Trump did with Mark Meadows, his biographer, and he's talking about, they get this back and forth that they're talking about at Bedminster in New Jersey.
Yep.
You know, that's not in the original indictment. He wasn't charged with anything in the original indictment, and they quote him as saying, "Oh, this is classified. I could have declassified it while I was president, but I didn't." All right. And they come back when they amend it and issue the superseding indictment. Guess what they don't charge him with?
Having that document.
Classified document violation.
Yeah.
Okay, this whole thing is a bait and switch, bunch of misinformation, and I believe, and I've written on this too. It's on my Substack that, I think it's a Presidential Records Act case.
Oh, I agree with
That's
you.
what I think.
Well, and the Espionage Act for people who are watching this that aren't familiar with it, and again, I'm no lawyer. I know what I'm able to read. The thing was passed at the turn of the 20th century under on the auspices of President Wilson, along with the Sedition Act. The Sedition Act hasn't held up, but the one thing about the Espionage Act, and stop me where I'm wrong,
Hmm?
is the person accused who is charged with it, you have to be able to prove that at the time They knowingly and with, if I may use the term, malice aforethought, knew that the act they were engaging in would be to the detriment of the United States and for their own personal enrichment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this live stream, ask yourself this question. Does anybody really believe that Donald John Trump hates America so much that he would willingly give away national security secrets to enemies of the United States, or even go so far as to mishandle those documents in a flippant or errant manner? I mean,
Yeah.
seriously?
Here's what's important too about the Florida indictment. President Trump is not accused. He's not even accused in the indictment whatsoever of having shared any national defense information.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point.
Right. He's not accused of espionage. All right.
Yeah.
He's just charged under this act. Here's what they have to prove under the Espionage Act, that Trump had unauthorized possession of national defense information with reason to believe the information could be used to the injury of the United States, that he retained the material and failed to deliver it, and that he did so willfully within the meaning of the law. The one about reason to believe the information could be used to the injury of the United States. There's some divergent case law. This is a documents case. There's some case law that says that doesn't apply to a documents case, just a verbal information case. So that'll have to be resolved. But that's from the patterned jury instructions for federal criminal cases. Those are the elements. All right. So, but look, they got to prove he had unauthorized possession, and the problem is that he didn't have unauthorized possession. Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just that simple. We could have another discussion about how all this went down and the
Sure.
way it's supposed to go down, but down to the brass tacks, basically, President Trump has the authority under the Presidential Records Act, and he's the one who designates documents and as to whether they're presidential documents or personal documents. Okay, the federal courts are not even clear at this stage over whether or not anybody can question that designation. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's one district court said you could. There's a court of appeal opinion that says you can't, and there's a court of appeal opinion that says you can, but only to determine whether the Presidential Records Act is being used to shield documents from Freedom of Information Act production, which are agency documents. Okay, so my point is, a document comes in, President Trump or his designee, or President Biden, whoever the president is, since the Presidential Records Act was passed, has to decide, is this my document or is this the government's document? President Trump went to Florida with the documents that he believed were his.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there was some back and forth with the National Archivist, who is a leftist Trump hater, or was at the time. I'm sure the new one is too, but the other one was for sure. They went back and forth, taking some documents. But what people don't realize is President Trump is the first president of the United States that did not have the assistance of the National Archives to gather all these documents. The GSA and White House people did it, and he didn't have 4 years to do it. He had a few weeks to do it. And he went to Mar-a-Lago with thousands and thousands and thousands of documents. So, and even if these documents are classified, the Presidential Records Act, even with respect to presidential records, keep this in mind. Even if President Trump has said that's a presidential record, it's not a personal record, it's supposed to go to the National Archives, he's entitled under the statute, under the Presidential Records Act, it says that he shall have access, even to classified documents. So what's this all about ultimately? And what people forget is presidents continue to receive classified briefings. If it was illegal for a president of the United States, former president, to have access to classified information, why is George Bush 43, the second Bush, George Bush?
Yeah, W.
President? George W. Bush. I get HW and W mixed up.
Oh, I know.
George W. Bush and Barack Obama still getting classified briefings if they can't have classified information. All right, so this is just there's a statutory construct called the Office of the Former President that deals with all that. And people forget
Yeah.
that Mar-a-Lago was a secured compartmentalized, or a portion of Mar-a-Lago during President Trump's administration was a
Yeah.
secured compartmentalized information facility, which is the most secure, where you can talk, it can have the highest classification of classified document and use it, talk about it, and everything else. So it's just, when I tell you, this is the biggest bunch of politicized BS in the history of this country, in my opinion.
Oh, I wholeheartedly concur, because the one case that I was most worried about was the Mar-a-Lago documents case. But
Mm-hmm.
and again, I'm just a guy that reads the news. I try to read as much opinion as I can, not being a trained lawyer, but even common sense. When you've got a judge up in the D.C. Circuit back in 2012, and you know the case I'm referring
The
to,
Clinton sock drawer case?
the Clinton sock drawer case, and said, well, okay, so what if they're in his sock drawer? He took them out of the White House. Guess what? They're his. And
Mm-hmm.
the part that boggles the mind is, and Trump and his people will freely tell anybody, we were negotiating with the National Archive to
Sure.
send back documents.
They
If
sent
they
him
wanted,
15 boxes of documents.
yeah, they wanted them back. Fine, we'll give them back to you. But people are, well, he kept making the statement he wasn't going to until he had a chance to go through all of it. Well, yeah, when you got that much material to go through, you're going to want to take some time to do it. But
Yeah.
Jack Smith couldn't wait. Oh no, we've got to charge him. We've got to charge him. So
Well,
I,
and
I
then the obstruction charges in the Florida case are part of what bothers me the most is President Trump turned over, and I have to tell you, if I know President Trump and his legal team is never going to call me. Okay, that's fine. But if I had been President Trump's lawyer and I got that subpoena, and they wanted all of the video from all of the cameras at Mar-a-Lago for whatever period of time it was like 9 months. I'd
yeah,
have to go back and double check. I would have challenged it immediately and said they're not entitled to this. And we'd go have a big brawl about it, and I'd go up the highest court I possibly could to try to put a stop to it. But what did he do? He gave it to them, and they do the same thing that they tried to do in the Mueller investigation over Russia collusion, which is total BS. Is argue about obstruction over a guy who gave them everything in the world. So gives them all the video, and he wanted to delete somebody. Look, come on, look, any idiot can delete video. If I
yeah,
want to delete some video, I delete the damn video. If the former president of the United States wanted to delete the video, I guarantee you, he calls the right person, they delete the video. There's no attempting to delete the video. I
yeah,
mean, and how do you delete it? How do you attempt to obstruct when you give them everything? You know,
yeah. I give
it's
you
just ludicrous.
I give you A through Y, but I don't hand over Z. You're trying to get me because I didn't give you Z, but I gave you the other 25 letters of the
But
alphabet.
yeah, but on the video, he gave it all to them.
Yeah.
They don't claim they didn't get it. That's what kills me. They claim that because this is the way the feds do things. This is why I say the feds are corrupt. They charge they charge your damn gardener, you know,
No, I
and
know.
people to try to get them to turn on you, and they charge his bellhop or whatever the guy is, and they
Mhm.
said, and he supposedly said, oh, the boss said to if we delete some of this, that's their obstruction. It didn't get deleted. Supposedly somebody said, we call it hearsay within hearsay within hearsay. Somebody said that somebody said that somebody else said. I
Mhm.
mean that and
Yeah,
that's in an indictment of the former president of the United States. They,
yeah,
they, they shouldn't put that if they'd indicted a dog catcher. That's
and,
how
and
bad this is.
and on top of that, not just the Mar-a-Lago case. Jack Boot is trying to squeeze former staffers at the White House and
Sure.
former congressional aides and former people who worked with Trump. Why? Because he's trying to broaden out the net. I mean, when he subpoenaed Trump's Twitter account,
Yeah.
that's the
Secretly.
one that secretly, and then put a non-disclosure ruling in on top of that, so people at Twitter couldn't tell anybody what he had done. That was the
Yeah.
part that galled me the most. I'm sitting there going, "Wait a minute! It's bad enough you're going behind everybody's back, going to Twitter and saying, we want access to all the login codes or all the keystrokes or all the everything as it relates to former President Trump's Twitter account and and all that. But then you're going before a judge and say, oh, by the way, we don't want anybody to know that we're doing this. So we need you to approve a non-disclosure order on Twitter that they can't tell anybody for
Yeah.
6 months after the fact. And I'm sitting there going, all right, if I needed no other reason, if I could be declared omnipotent God for 24 hours, such that I have all power to do everything to the federal government that I want to do, believe me, that's all the reason. Right there is that's the last straw for me. It's like DOJ is getting seriously pruned. FBI is either getting pruned or taken down to the point only the crime lab is left, and that's it. I mean, just whole sections of the federal government, because this is out of control.
It is
This
out of
is
control.
absolutely mad what's
And
going
and
on.
and what's worse is, we expect there to be overzealous prosecutors, and Jack Smith's an overzealous prosecutor.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
could talk about the illustrations of that. But what's supposed to protect us is the judiciary,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a perfect illustration of how they've corrupted the federal judiciary in D.C. Because that case was brought in front of Judge Burl Howell, and Burl Howell was a chief judge at the time. Uh, a I'll call her we'll be polite and call her a leftist uh, activist that got appointed to the federal bench. And what does she do? So the prosecutor goes to the court and says, "Look, we can't let Trump know about this because he's a flight risk,"
Oh God, yes.
and it's in the order.
I know. I
And then
know.
it gets to the Court of Appeal when Twitter finds out about it and they finally get notice of it. They go, "Wait a minute, the president's not a flight risk. You can't hide it from him because he's a flight risk." They all, we included that by mistake. And the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals doesn't have the decency, even though they know this is all going to come out later. And nobody knows right now. It's all on the down low. But that was included by mistake, and it was included in the judge's order by mistake. That wasn't a mistake. That's why I tell you, look, these people are the ones who are supposed to be guarding the hen house. That's the people that are supposed to make sure that the prosecutor's not overstepping his bounds. And that's why I say the system's corrupt, because they're not. They're all in league. They're all out for the same end, which is to get Donald Trump. And we don't even have a court of appeal that's decent enough to go to look. Put me on the court of appeal. I'd go. What in the hell are y'all talking about?
Yeah.
Boom. This is reversed. The president's not a flight risk. That's an unethical, sanctionable claim to make. And we got a judge made it, and the prosecutor makes it, and the court of appeal. Oh, that was a mistake. They said it was a mistake. What do we just believe everything these idiots say? That's what we're up against. So
Well,
don't think for a minute that they're going to try to hang him high.
oh, I know,
guarantee it.
and believe me, on my list of things to do when I become the omnipotent despot is to either severely reduce the size of the DC circuit or just out and out abolish it. Which
Yeah,
is
it
because for
it
a
needs.
long time the
Yeah,
DC circuit was actually a fairly either moderate to conservative court, and then all of a
yeah,
sudden one of the first things Obama did when he got in, he expanded the size of the DC circuit to include more judges than it had ever known. And now it's like, I mean, Robert Barnes has talked about this. You talked about this. Others have talked about this. You cannot get a fair trial in the DC circuit.
not
You can't. You can't.
and well, if you're a Democrat, you'll get automatically acquitted.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But what needs to happen with the DC circuit? It needs to be. I mean, the DC district
Yeah.
needs to be broken up and divided up into. They just divided up into the surrounding districts. Some part of it being Virginia, part in Maryland,
Yeah.
and diffuse that accumulation of power And then they
Absolutely.
need to roll the appellate circuit into the surrounding appellate circuits. That's what I would like to see done.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You
And
know,
it's like you said, we could sit here and go on for hours on end because I'm like you. These set of indictments are the most insane things I've ever seen, either legally, politically, or both. But there's going to be
and
more to talk about. Absolutely.
and Brian, I got to tell you, especially when I get going about it, I get really upset about it.
Oh, I
It's
don't blame you.
and it's especially if if you know what the law is or have an idea of what the law is, you're like, man, this is terrible. These that Georgia indictment uses constitutionally protected speech,
Hmm.
constitutionally protected right to petition for redress of grievances, access to courts, and everything else as racketeering activity and steps in furtherance of a conspiracy.
Yeah.
I'm not making this up.
No. Oh, I know.
That's what it is.
Yeah. And
And it's littered with lies. I've got a whole chapter in volume one about President Trump's January 2nd, 2021 conversation. But it wasn't just him, but that whole conversation with the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, in Georgia. And everybody lies about it, everybody in the media. But you really hate to see prosecutors lie about it. And when you talk about Fannie Willis, you want to talk about corrupt. A Georgia district court or Georgia courts, because I'm sure they appealed it, ruled that she couldn't have anything to do. She couldn't investigate, charge, have anything to do with the lieutenant governor, all right, of Georgia, because he was one of the alternate electors and she was investigating him. But she had politically supported his opponent and raised money for him and stuff. And he went to he went to state court in Georgia and said, look, this is political persecution. And she got ordered to drop the investigation in him. And I'm going to tell you, I've been a lawyer for 26 years, it'll be 27 in October, and I've never heard of a court ever in any other circumstance telling a district attorney they could not investigate or prosecute someone because they were so politically biased that it was beyond the pale and not allowable.
that's
That's who's
extra.
prosecuting President Trump.
That is
And
extraordinary.
and you won't hear that from the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, or that gaggle of legacy media hacks. But that
What?
happened.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go research that one because that
Mhm.
one's so worth a good video for.
I
It
forget the
truly
guy's
is.
name now. It's escaping me. I've
Okay.
dealt with so much of this. I
What
mean, it's.
wasn't Duncan, was it? Wasn't Jeff Duncan? Or am I thinking of somebody
I
else?
think you might be right. You know what? I could Google it real quick and tell you. But yeah, she got ordered to leave him alone, drop the investigation. She can't have anything to do with it.
Jesus
Her and her office
Lord.
can't have anything to do with it. Oh,
Have
but
mercy.
but but she can investigate the president
Oh, of
and
course.
his lawyers
Oh, of course, because he's just the king. He's just the kingpin of a
and
racketeering.
the chief and the White House chief of staff and DOJ senior lawyers at the DOJ. I mean,
Oh, it's unbelievable.
when this is over, there's a whole bunch of people, not the people charged in the indictments. There's a whole bunch of other people need to lose their law licenses, in my opinion.
I wholeheartedly
So
concur.
we'll see what happens. They'll probably all get promotions and you know university. They'll get hired by Yale and Harvard and uh, get a bunch of golden parachutes. That's the way that usually works.
That's a crying
But
shame too. But yeah,
anyway,
as this goes on, we're going to keep an eye on it, sir. This has been an absolute pleasure. You are welcome to come back here anytime you want to.
well,
And
thank you.
as these things go on, I definitely want to bring you back because I want legal perspective on it. But as we start to wrap this up tonight, where can people find you on social media? How best can they support your efforts? Where can people find the books? Tell
Yeah.
everybody your coordinates on social media.
I appreciate it. All right, on Twitter, Daniel R Street one is my handle at Twitter. Daniel R Street at Truth Social. My website is danielrstreet.com. The books are on Amazon, or there's links to them on my website. And my Substack is danielrstreet.substack.com. There's links to that from my website. So you get everything that I'm doing you can get from my website, danielrstreet.com. And there's even a link to, you can still get the newest book, the e version anyway, for free from BookFunnel.
Oh, that's
So
great. Yeah, this has been a fantastic discussion, and absolutely, let's do this again sometime. So hang on for a minute. We'll say some proper goodbyes, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for stopping by, chatting on the porch. My name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. We'll be back Saturday morning with Front Porch Brunch, which is our weekly review of the news. And boy, are we going to have a lot of news to talk about this Saturday morning. So thank you, everybody, for stopping by. Have a wonderful night and stay safe out there in America. We love you. Have a good night.